Oh, thank you. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. So the University of Iowa has a very long history of creative writing. It's often said that the workshop method was pioneered there in the mid-30s, which is the way that most creative writing programs now teach creative writing in the classroom. And I'm at the International Writing Program where we wanted to translate this method online, and scale it so that many, many people could, have the opportunity to study creative writing in this way. On the internet together from all sorts of different regions and backgrounds, and an important part of that was to promote new international communities, particularly because much of our work is funded by the State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, so creating new cultural exchange opportunities. So let's see, just a super quick overview of instruction. The two important things that we were looking at were instruction and community. Instruction, the teacher of the creative writing course, setting the course goals, setting success parameters for the students, helping the students learn how to set goals and parameters for themselves, with the idea that they may well become writers. Similarly, the other important component is community. The instructor teaches the students how to form supportive and critical communities for one another, with, again, the idea that in the long term, writers will need community references to succeed over time as a lifelong practice. So then we came up with How Writers Write Fiction. The 2015 iteration we opened 1 year ago on NovoEd. It was our first MOOC on NovoEd, and we partnered with them specifically because their platform supported this kind of creative, community-based, exciting, and interactive learning. The course at a glance, just really quickly, we had, in order to sort of support a diversity of learning styles, we had a diversity of expertises. So we had two co-host instructors introduce each class video, but the class videos themselves were comprised of lectures from many different authors from around the world. And we had a teaching team of moderators who led the students through discussions of the videos, the writing assignments, and so forth, sort of around-the-clock discussions. They worked different time shifts. And the assignments were all submitted publicly to the entire course for community-wide feedback and formalized peer review. And we had, did you want to speak about the enrollment or anything like that?
Sure, yeah, it was a pretty big course, 12,000 registered learners from 123 countries, 74 primary languages, so it was really exciting to see everyone come together. They're both English native speakers and non-native speakers learning English with each other through this collaborative experience. And in working together with Susanna, we have a pretty flexible platform, but what was really important for us was that we brought in the right pieces on the platform so that we can create and remodel this workshop model. So I just wanted to show you a couple of examples of what we did on the platform to enable collaborative learning, but also project-based learning. So here is what you might have seen in different platforms, video and lecture on your left-hand side. But on this side, you see a type of assignment that we gave a student. And every week, a student would work on an assignment, and they would have a prompt, both for beginner and more advanced level writers. And so what they would do is they would submit their assignment, receive peer feedback, and then in the next week, based on that peer feedback, maybe work on the same assignment or work on a different assignment, maybe work on the same piece, but maybe work on a different one. We also had class discussions led by teaching moderators. They were around the clock on the platform, so even at night they might be live responding to posts or inquiries or providing feedback. On this side, you see a type of in-lecture discussion. So right after the lecture, a teaching moderator might prompt a question based on that lecture. Here you see something that's more week content topic based. So based on what you've learned throughout the course, throughout this week, what do you think of XYZ? Here is what we call our assignment gallery. So every week after these students submit their assignments, they see everybody else's work, and you can see how people have commented or liked on people's submissions, and they get to really learn from each other by reading others' works, but also receiving feedback and comments from their peers. This is an example of peer review. So on this side, you see the rubric that Susanna has put together, and on the other side, you see a type of review that they may have received from their peers. This type was actually anonymous, but this is a type of feedback that was more community driven, so it didn't have a rubric attached. But you see here Catherine saying, thanks for the comments. I was able to really shape what I was writing based on the feedback that you provided a couple weeks ago. So Craig is saying, Catherine, talk about major surgery. You've done a great job. So it's really interesting to see how they came together as a community to provide each other this type of feedback throughout the course. And this is an example of a student-led group that we would have. These are interest-based groups, so they may have been about a nonprofit, about historical fiction or about young adult or different types of content.
And so in each of those cases, we tried to support both synchronous and asynchronous learning. You know, for example, we had the teaching moderators working in different shifts around the clock. Like we would schedule someone for like the 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. shift, CDT, because obviously somewhere else it's not 12 a.m. But we also made sure that everyone was sort of initially herded, so to speak, into all of the discussions, so that, you know, they could find someone to talk to live if they wanted to. They didn't have to, you know. And we also had the discussions geared to different levels. Everything was signposted as being open to everyone, but we had discussions for beginning writers, for advanced writers, for writers interested in perhaps genre fiction, for writers interested in like long form writing, the novel, that kind of thing. And so our initial observations were really, really interesting to see. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, and as I hope you can sort of tell from just how we've walked you through this model, the workshop model is collaborative. It's community-based. You know, it's not a lecture model. However, the instructor sets the parameters for success, you know, and that's based on teaching experience, but in the creative writing world, that's also based on subject expertise, you know, on having built a successful career as an author. And something we saw here that was extremely interesting to us was the users didn't uniformly accept those teaching methods or success parameters. They didn't even uniformly notice them. I'm sure everyone's familiar with. It's hard to get MOOC learners to read everything. It can be hard to get them to read any particular thing that is really important. And you know, and we've worked extensively with signposting, and nevertheless, like that uniformity of acceptance couldn't really be created. They considered the teachers in the videos, in the teaching team, and the readings, resources, optional resources, you know, and they had and you know, that they felt were for them to pick and choose from, to evaluate, you know, to consider the value of. And so we couldn't get any kind of universal buy-in to the course goals. However, user satisfaction was really high. Participation was through the roof. It was fantastic. And they formed a very, very strong community quicker and I think more sincerely, more deeply than I've seen typically happen in the classroom. And so what we sort of figured out from that was it was the beginning of our steps of understanding how important user agency would be for this kind of teaching. So we did some mid-course adjustments. For example, we adjusted the course delivery to better support asynchronous and experimental engagement, you know, non-linear progression. We didn't require coursework. We stopped requiring coursework to be done, like week 1 coursework to be done during week 1, week 2 during week 2. We let people move back and forth, revise their assignments and resubmit them, that kind of thing. The teaching moderators had to become extremely flexible in their teaching styles, and it was a really exciting experience to work with them. They really had to become coaches. You know, they had to become expert resources. They couldn't direct the conversations the way they had expected to be able to do. And then we encouraged the users, since the community was so strong, you know, and so proactive, we encouraged the users to take that further. We capitalized on it for the success of the course by sort of adjusting the way discussions were managed to support the way that they wanted to engage. Let's see, is there anything else we want to say about that?
Oh, there's so much activity in the course that we actually had to reduce the amount of emails that all the students receive, and that's the first time we had to do that, which is really interesting for us. It's a new type of learner, the creative writers who really want to engage. It was very exciting to see.
So rather than having to be reminded to engage, they asked us to stop reminding them so much. And let's see. So findings and conclusions. So our 2 goals, again, were to translate this workshop into MOOC format and then to promote community. So for this first goal, again, the users agreed on the value of the materials. They were excited about the diversity of authors and of readings and of writing assignments and of community opportunities. They loved the diverse teaching team. They loved having all those teachers to work with. It's just that, again, they thought all of those were like optional for their personal evaluation and use, which was really interesting and fun to work with. And again, the teachers really had to function as coaches and mentors in order for this to be successful. They didn't know, it's not as if, they valued a lot of the course components very highly, as we'll show you in a minute, but not all for the same reasons or in the same ways. And so, and they performed best, again, when we supported them, in this learning style. And we adjusted the course to support this very agency-driven ownership of the course materials and of what progression in this course would be, what mastery would be for these people. And then in terms of promoting international online community, again, while they didn't agree on the value of the community resources either, the assignment gallery that you saw where all the assignments are visible, the formal anonymized peer review, the informal community-based, informal back and forth feedback, which we used in combination to teach them basically how to become a workshop community. They didn't agree on the value of each of those things. There was, again, a complete lack of sort of uniform acceptance. But they did what they all agreed on was their commitment to trying different things out, to being honest about what they thought with each other, to really working hard together. They worked very, very hard. People were working hard to use the resources in different ways, but the commonality was that they were working very hard to use all of them. And so the community that was formed was very, very strong. We were very impressed by the participation. I've heard many stories just post-MOOC of how long the writing groups that were formed have lasted, and how many people keep in touch, which is really nice to hear always. So what we discovered, again, was that this kind of agency supporting and scaffolding this kind of agency produced joy, as we said, and I think it's also important to note that it produced dedication. This kind of, when you describe this kind of learning, it sounds like this very dilettantish engagement. It doesn't sound like it has a high educational value. It doesn't sound like it'll produce people who've really mastered things or really given themselves an in-depth educational experience. But that wasn't what our survey results that told us. That wasn't what our experience of watching the learners together told us. They were, again, working very hard, trying very hard to do the assignments, revising, building relationships with teachers and with one another in a really dedicated way. And do you want to speak to the...
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I can't see the percentages, but we did a post-course survey to see, well, we pulled in so many of these asynchronous and synchronous activities. What did they value the most? And it was really interesting to see that it was very diverse. People, like Susanna said, brought in what they thought was most important for their own craft, for their own progression through the course. So you see very high percentage. Peer review was very valuable, moderator-led discussions, but also watching the videos and completing the assignments. And so we saw this mix of activity in the course that I think was successful because we had incorporated all these different pathways, all these different entryways for the learners, both for beginners and advanced. Yeah.
So this led us to together to what we've been leading to, which is just a reevaluation of our online teaching methods, and a sort of more formalized structural analysis of that for next steps. So again, what we learned is in order to meet our success parameters, our original plans to create a successful creative writing workshop in MOOC format and to promote international community, in order to meet those goals, we had to take a step back as teachers, as course providers and as experts. And the users had to take a step forward, both as individuals and as a community. And the more we scaffolded and supported them in directing their own learning experiences, the better the results were. Our engagement, like the better retention was, the better activity was day-to-day on the course, and the higher the responses were in terms of their happiness and satisfaction with their pursuits and with what they learned and what they would be taking away. I think... anything else? Yeah.
I think we have time for a few questions. You guys can call in.
So it sounds like the peer review process was really highly valued. Mm-hmm. Was there any part in the course that taught people how to do that, or did you just supply them with a rubric? Like, was there any kind of examples of here's how our peer review works, here's how I used a rubric in testing yourself, or was it just kind of here you go do it?
We did it in a couple different ways because this was actually our second time teaching how writers write fiction. We had a 2014 version, and so although we hadn't built, the first time we built it, it was more of a creative writing camp and less of a course. But we had a little bit of experience with knowing that you have to scaffold knowledge in a couple of different ways, which is partly why I think we were able to work with Novo Ed, who were also very flexible, and creative to kind of make mid-course adjustments that were successful, that weren't just oh God, let's redo, but that actually worked well. So we knew from previous experience that you have to scaffold this in a couple different ways. So we did peer review directions where it's here's how peer review works. Here are the questions that you should consider. This is why you should consider those questions, because this is how we build a workshop community in terms of the kind of questions you need to know how to ask and know how to answer. So we built that into the peer review system, but we also put that kind of thing on a course page. We also had our teaching moderators go through that with everyone in discussion, you know, and we also had some of our student mentors, our sort of longtime users of different MOOCs, come in and set examples in the community feedback side, the non-anonymous side, so that it was modeled in, you know, multiple avenues. Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of hearing the participants' reactions, like a lot of different things they appreciated about the course and a lot of different outcomes that were probably valuable. Can you just talk a little bit about what made you focus in on kind of agency as the independent variable of most interest and then joy as kind of the outcome variable of most interest for this particular project? Are there other things that you didn't focus on that were there, or is there a reason why this kind of comes to the front as the two big things?
Agency comes to the front with, so we're opening our eighth creative writing / lit MOOC next week now, and agency comes to the front pretty much every time. I think it has something to do with the subject matter, as I said, with the fact that even in the traditional classroom, creative writing is a very collaborative effort, and if you're a serious student of creative writing or you are in a classroom because you think you might become one, you know that in the long term only you can determine how good you'll be at this, and how, you know, there is no sort of professional path to follow the steps of. So agency's always been a big part of it. I think in joy, I think the other thing to sort of one of the reasons that I love teaching creative writing and that I studied it is because mastery produces joy. You know, I mean, I think in fairness that could be said about many, many disciplines, you know, but it's an art, it's a craft and an art. And so what we saw emerging from the users over and over again was satisfaction of what they had mastered, you know, the specific skills. I know how to use dialogue now, I know how to build plot now, you know, in this very concrete way. But emerging from that, this feeling of like, and therefore I have so much latitude as an artist, you know, I have so many opportunities in front of me. You know, that kind of buoyancy come up again and again.
Let's do one more question.
Thank you. My question is because peer review is always something that's really good to implement in a course, but at the same time, it's also about how much control I do have over the chaos that might happen. So, since this experience has been successful, what not to do?
What not to do? Well, one of the things that we learned is that I didn't want to go into too much detail with the mid-course adjustments, but one of the things that we learned, for example, traditionally NovoEd has a thing where, I don't know what is actually, we call it the assignment wall, which is probably not its name, where you submit, you submit an assignment and it's due on Monday, okay, and you have, let's say you had a week to do it until Monday, and then on Tuesday you can see all of them together. You know, that doesn't work for writers. They want to start community feedback immediately. As soon as they've submitted, they want to see how everybody else did it, and they want to start talking about, like, okay, I did it, here's mine, and you did it, let's talk about how we did it differently, and they don't want to wait, they want the momentum. So we learned that we actually worked with NovoEd, and they actually rebuilt part of their platform for us in order to take that wall down. We also, we learned that while structured peer review had a lot of value for a lot of people, anonymity did not. You know, they don't, they very badly want to know who gave them the comments on the story. I think partly because, again, the writing community is very pay-it-forward focused and relationship-oriented. You know, and so if you get a comment on a story that you love, you want to go find that person and thank them and ask them more questions and review their work. You know, so we learned also that, you know, we needed to really actively facilitate relationship building.
Great. All right, thanks, guys.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Blumsmith.
I'm Max Zerkowski.
And we're here to talk about negotiating the medium, designing for learner-centered experiences in the massive open online space. And this is based on research we've done alongside Professor Karen Brennan at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So we actually came into this work through an interest in MOOC learners, and specifically teacher learners. We had begun by interviewing teacher participants in the Creative Computing Online Workshop, which was a course designed to help educators learn about Scratch, a programming language for young children. And it was an online version of what had been a series of face-to-face workshops. And it was designed around constructionist principles of learning, which we'll talk more about shortly. And through speaking with learners about what was meaningful to them in that learning experience, what kinds of learning outcomes they valued, we noticed a sort of core set of tensions, both within and across the experiences of learners, that seemed particularly relevant to the medium. And we were interested in how other designers were experiencing the sort of challenges and possibilities of doing this more learner-centered work in the MOOC space. And so even though we came in through an interest in teacher learning, we do think what we're going to talk about today has some relevance more broadly to learning in MOOCs in general. So we ended up speaking with 6 groups and individuals who were involved in the design and facilitation of MOOCs that had taken place or were taking place during the summer of 2014, and we're going to specifically focus on 4 of them today. These courses had used a variety of platforms, some more traditional ones like Coursera to Google Course Builder, a variety of discussion forums, Piazza, Discourse, Google+, and in many cases they were also online iterations of what had been face-to-face courses in universities, workshops in museums, and other forms of professional development settings. And even though the courses ranged in terms of the specificity of the content with which they wanted learners to engage, they were all sort of about exposing people to different ideas about learning and the relationship of those ideas to the work that people were doing in their own lives. And there were a lot of different words that these designers used to talk about their pedagogical philosophy and sort of the characteristics of those learning experiences, and they sometimes used more than one word, including learner-centered, constructivist, connectivist, constructionist. So for the purposes of our analysis and discussion here, we're going to talk about that through the characteristics of what our colleague Karen Brennan has identified as 4 central aspirations for learning that define constructionism. And those include an aspiration towards making, the importance of doing and creating, doing that work in a way that's connected to one's own interests, needs, and desires, having that take place within a community with whom you share your work and ideas and you learn from the work and idea of others, and throughout engaging in an iterative process of reflection on what you're doing and what it means.
So we were interested specifically in understanding how the aspiration towards supporting learners in making, sharing, personalizing, and reflecting kind of interacted with this unique kind of MOOC context. And in particular, we were interested in what tensions might course designers confront and negotiate in pursuing these aspirations, and what design choices and strategies they used to try to negotiate these various tensions. And because of these early findings, we came to this work with a particular conceptual lens that stems from activity theory and community of practice theory. And that really conceptualizes the role of designers, not as people who implement a checklist of best practices, but rather negotiators of different dualities or tensions. And Sasha Barab and his colleagues define kind of these dualities as overlapping yet conflicting activities and needs that drive the dynamics of a system. So in our design and analysis of these interviews, we really sought to understand what these overlapping and competing design priorities were that were relevant to those designers who are trying to give learner-centered experiences in this MOOC context.
So what did we find? So this first central aspiration around that people would be making things, that they would be making things that were connected to their own interests and passion and needs. In some courses, there was more of an emphasis on physical making, and in others, that idea of making also included just new ways of enacting practices. And as this was articulated by one designer that we spoke with. So I think we really believe that by supporting that type of design-based project activity in a social context where people are passionate about the things they're working on, we think that's where a lot of the best learning experiences happen. Then a tension that emerged out of this aspiration was something that we'd also seen in our discussion with teacher learners in CCAL, and it's something we call experimentation with validation. This idea that both learners and designers really valued exploring and taking risks in learning and trying new things, but to do that required some base level of support so that people felt secure enough to engage in that more ambiguous and messy learning space. And this was especially true in an online context where it can be easy for learners to drop out when they experience frustration and difficulty, and that can be exacerbated by the potential for anonymity in a giant online learning space. And there were a few different things that the designers we spoke with did to negotiate this tension. So first, they designed activities with multiple entry points so that learners with different levels of experience, of knowledge, of comfort could find a way to enter into that process. And in giving people a starting place, they provided models of what making could look like, but tried to have those models themselves reflect a value for experimentation and diversity to disrupt this idea of one right way of doing something. And lastly, designers engaged in some very purposeful messaging to communicate to participants that what they were doing was exactly what they were supposed to be doing. And as one designer explained more fully, so what we tried to do was sort of re-norming for any person who might click whenever by having the forward-facing message being you're right on time. What is happening in the community throughout is what everyone is supposed to be doing. And through this kind of validation, designers describe themselves as consciously pushing back, not just against the potential for people to drop out, but also the ways in which participants brought a particular kind of socialization around what it meant to be in a course, where participants thought they had to do what facilitators were asking and often apologized for seeming not to be doing that. But facilitators actually really valued the ways in which learners might be personalizing as they made decisions about what to do and how.
So a second aspiration that the designers spoke about was this desire to allow individuals to share with each other. So one designer articulated this particular vision of sharing quite well, saying that we wanted to create a way for people to connect with others who were kindred spirits, who they felt that they could share with and learn from and collaborate with. But this aspiration too came with a tension. Basically, designers noted that there was a challenge of building feelings of commonality that support this kind of sharing and learning from one another, and that can be quite different in difficult in the context of a large online course with kind of a very diverse and different set of participants. So we articulated this tension as diversity with commonality, and it's actually a tension that we also noticed in kind of the reflections of participants in the Creative Computing Online workshop that we focused on initially. And designers did have a number of strategies that they used to try to negotiate this tension. So one was to focus considerable effort on designing early activities at the beginning of the course that promote meaningful and personal conversations among participants that highlight kind of important elements of their background and their interests that can help spark future sharing and conversations. Additionally, designers also work to provide kind of synchronous opportunities for participants to interact with one another in kind of smaller and more intimate settings. But a lot of the designers noted how difficult this particular strategy was, since it heightens the risk that one particular conversation or small group might have members who aren't available, and then it fizzles out, and that can really demotivate participants in a way that otherwise wouldn't happen in a massive course. And then finally, designers work to shift their approach to facilitation. So it was less about kind of responding to questions and comments, as might happen in more of a face-to-face classroom. And it was much more about strategically highlighting participant work that embodied the variety of ways, the variety of legitimate ways and values that the designers wanted participants to engage with in the course. So we're going to hear about one group of designers and how they thought about this particular facilitation approach. So if some work went up in the community, then we would surface it in the newsletter, knowing that not everyone is watching as closely as we are. We are highlighting work that is taking advantage of the possibilities and the open nature of the work we are engaged in. So many of the designers we spoke to discussed how this particular practice helped people see what's possible in terms of how they might be able to engage in the course, generated enthusiasm from participants who were excited to see that their work was featured or might be featured, and ensured that participants were actually doing most of the work of actually responding to one another's questions and answering each other. And that actually had this indirect benefit of building the community in a much stronger way. So a fourth aspiration was to support participants in reflecting about the ideas of the course and how that connected to their own lives and their own practice and learning. So one designer summarized this aspiration in a particular way, that the course was about trying to help people understand those ideas and reflect on how those ideas connect with their own experiences and apply to their current work. But a challenge emerged around designing a kind of learning experience that supports a large and diverse group of people in developing their thinking, often in quite different trajectories, depending on what their professional setting or context is. And we label this tension as kind of global versus local, which comes from Wenger's Communities of Practice framework. And Barab and his colleagues summarized the duality in this way, saying that the more local the unit of analysis, e.g. sharing videos of interactions in a particular classroom, the less significance this experience may have for other individuals in other locations. So again, designers had a few different strategies for trying to negotiate this tension. First, they described having to pay particularly close attention to even the precise wording of discussion prompts so that they could generate reflection across all different kinds of course participants. And this required a balancing of kind of specificity with open-endedness and being attentive and responsive to the conversations that were already happening in an emergent way in the course. Designers also focused on how they couldn't always rely on dialogue or skilled facilitation to lead participants to insight or kind of those aha moments like they might in a face-to-face encounter. And thus, many of them emphasized actually the importance of foregrounding the core ideas and principles to help frame their participants' thinking, even if at times that required a trade-off or sacrifice for designers who really wanted to aspire to more an inductive approach to kind of the course environment. And then finally, designers intentionally modeled many of the metacognitive processes that they hoped their participants would be engaging in, often by acknowledging kind of the experimental nature of the course that they were designing. So again, one set of designers reflected that another element of it was the recursive nature, us saying the course is an experiment is also part of what we think a good learning experience is like. So we were also trying to, through our experiment with the course, communicate that it's okay to experiment with learning processes. So again, they framed their course as a big experiment as a way to get other individuals to think about the core principles of the course in the context of their own learning and their own work.
And across all of these aspirations for learning and their manifestation in the MOOC space, we noticed one final tension also articulated by Barab and colleagues, which is this tension between the aspects of the learning experience that are very purposely designed and the aspects that are allowed to emerge from within the community. And I think we saw this actually in the presentation right before as well. And as one designer described, it's less planning, and it's more tinkering and responsiveness to what's happening, but you still have clear ideas about how technology should be used, what the ideas in the course were, so it's not just, what do you guys want? And as some designers noted, it was actually having that very strong sense of learning principles and aspirations that allowed them to be more flexible to what was coming out of the community because they could trust that those emergent directions were connected to the core ideas of the course. And across all the things we've spoken about today, we've seen some of these more carefully designed elements in terms of crafting activities with multiple entry points, a thoughtful sequencing of activities to promote connection, the careful crafting of discussion prompts, and also things that were allowed to emerge, pulling models from within the community, giving participants the opportunity to voice their opinions and actually letting those opinions drive the direction of the course. And in this constant responsiveness to what's happening, also engaging in a very purposeful and public performance of that responsiveness back out to participants and back out to the community. And lastly, and we're obviously not the first people to note this, so we recognize that there's been a lot of possibly inflated excitement about the MOOC medium and possibly inflated disappointment following that excitement. And we're interested, as this conference is, in how to disrupt those kinds of pendulum swings. And as one designer himself said, sort of after this roller coaster of hope and disillusionment, we're probably going to move back to, okay, what can we do with this? And we wanted to come back to this idea of continuing to explore what's possible And as Max noted at the beginning, this is the reason we're drawn to tensions as a framework, as a reflection of the ongoing process of negotiating learner needs and aspirations for learning environments in the context of a very specific medium.
So we'd like to conclude just with offering a few questions we have for you, or kind of areas where we'd like feedback. One is whether there are particular design or theoretical conversations that you think this work might contribute to, or findings that you think are worth exploring more or unpacking further. Additionally, we're interested in if there's any additional forms of data that might make this work a little more compelling or persuasive. And then finally, you know, a lot of the data we gathered is from 2014, and a lot has probably changed since then. So we're curious how, based on changes over the past few years, maybe we want to reframe or rethink some of the aspects of our work. So with that, we want to leave it with questions. Thank you. Here's our contact information if anyone has further follow-up questions they'd like to ask.
We'll go back to the, you're welcome to ask anything, but we especially welcome feedback in these areas. Thank you.
So as far as the designers who made this and trying to understand the framework of how the course was made, like who got to make the decisions about how the course was made? Is it the designers? Like I know, like, so I'm from MIT, and for us it's the faculty. And so we can give them best practices and make suggestions to them, but we don't get to design their course. So I'm just like, what's the format of being able to go in and be responsive and to put in, like, say, like, yeah, we really do need to, you know, even as we talked about the peer review, like, teach people how to learn so that they can get the most out of this MOOC, where I just have some faculty that are like, no, I just put my content up and that's what I do. And it's like, okay, well, then you're really just putting your content up, and I don't know. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So the set of people that we spoke to, and particularly the 4 groups that we focused on here, had a huge amount of sort of autonomy and control, and we used facilitator and designer somewhat interchangeably, and the folks we spoke to were both the sort of creative design of the course, but were also quite actively involved in the day-to-day facilitation. So they were like, they were visuals and videos, they were like popping up on discussion boards, even though there were often others as well. But that's an important point, that was sort of unique, something to note that's sort of unique in this set of folks, that they had a huge amount of creative control.
I mean, it's great to have it, because then it's, again, I can add it to my quiver of like, well, look at this worked out really well, and maybe we should take a look at this because it worked.
Yeah, and then it's easier to do that kind of in-time responsiveness to sort of reflecting on what was it that we were trying to do, but what is it that's happening and how we might want to change. And it's much easier to do that if you get all the control over what to do and how.
So they were working with a faculty member together, or they had the full control over the course? I'm confused. So the people that you talked with also work with a faculty member together, or?
So it wasn't always that relationship of like platform versus faculty. Often these are faculty members who are interested in this particular space. So the courses they're designing, there's not another faculty member who like is giving different kinds of content. They're wearing both hats.
So it was really interesting and different, and I wonder how you think this framework could be used to inform the design of a MOOC. So this is something that you'll go and sit with designers and instructors and say, here's tension, choose a point where you want to be, or like, how do you plan to use it?
So, and I think one of the things that we noted in sort of saying, and to sort of note that we're coming out of interest in teacher learning, and you folks have much more expertise than we do about sort of MOOCs and what they can look like, that this is not sort of saying, here are exact design strategies that are always going to work, but these were things that we noticed across this fairly small group, but things that people were really thinking about. And again, I saw actually a lot of resonance with the first presentation. So I think the hope is to sort of call attention to these as important issues to think about, and offer a few suggestions of here were some specific ways that people found to engage with these tensions. But obviously and we'd be interested, like, are there other practices that you see out there doing that? But I think noting both the uniqueness of the creative control and the uniqueness of the sort of content aspirations of these groups. And as we talked about, I think there are some important differences when there is some very specific content that you have to get across, and there might be stakes attached to whether or not learners fully take in all of that content. And these were much more sort of open-ended, exploratory, get people to engage with new ideas. So I think that would change it as well.
Back to the teams and see how it helps them reflect on the processes.
We have not done that yet, but that's
It's a really good idea.
that's a really
Thank you.
good idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's things that they probably know in some sense, right? Like often we're just taking the things that they are saying, but I think maybe it might be helpful just to see it put in the context of attention rather than just like a neat idea that you came up with as you were grappling with different aspects of the course.
Okay, let's do, let's actually go to the next one, and then we'll do questions, more time for questions at the end.
Thanks. Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about Cadenza and how we're building and working with partners in the arts and creative space. So Cadenza was built from the ground up to be a platform where art institutions can work with music, design, film, media in general. So it was designed from the beginning with these intentions, like what do you need to do to build these things? And I think what's been really exciting about our partners, I think we've been able to bring faculty who were at these campuses working on with other platforms to the MOOC space, like finally be like, okay, cool, I could do something like this, and institutions that have kind of been left out of this whole movement that we're all a part of. So it's been really exciting to build these courses. Like our platform for the users are specifically based on creativity. So when you come to Cadenza, you're not going to find like a history course or biology course. It's all based in this one area, and that allows us to do things that's a little different. One big thing about the design and everything that we're doing, a lot of these schools are like the best, film schools, design schools. Everything about what we're doing is really important because what those partners, are teaching their students, the products of the MOOC have to be at that same level. So the production process is very important. So we work with the schools and the partners to create the courses, create video lectures. I'll show you an example of a couple.
I'm Matt Zillady, chair of the MFA in Comics program at California College of the Arts. Ever since I read my very first comic, I knew I wanted to be part of this world. I wanted to be a storyteller, and I wanted to see my stories come to life in the panels of a comic book page.
Design is part of society, politics, and ideology. It is form, content, medium, and message. I'm Brockett Horn.
I'm Ellen Lupton. We teach design and history at the Maryland Institute College of Art.
This course, Graphic Design History, is based on a class we teach together here at MICA. Our campus in Baltimore is a lively place for designers and artists to learn, do, and create.
I'm Jack W. Stamps. I'm a songwriter, producer, and composer. I am also a lecturer and program coordinator in the Center for Arts and Entertainment Technologies at UT Austin. This course, Foundations of Arts and Entertainment Technologies, takes a look at entertainment concepts, identifies the underlying technology involved, and reveals how this technology is delivered.
We take the piano as we know it for granted and consider it a finished product. But in fact, the piano has always been in a continual state of reinvention. This reinvention has focused on the keys of the piano, the action, and the way the hammer strikes the strings, as well as how the strings are tuned and tuned to one another. It has also involved automating the piano, or using it as a model for programming a digital version of the piano. I'm Dan Truman, and I'm a composer, fiddler, and instrument builder. I'm also a professor of music here at Princeton. This is not a history course, nor is it really about the piano. Rather, we'll use the piano to unpack a wide range of musical ideas that are relevant when we reinvent the piano.
So you get the idea of the type of production and the type of way we present and entice people, not only teachers, but also learners, into this space and into this movement. There are a couple of things that we had to do to design for our partners. I'll show you a couple things, like, for example, it's very media rich. For our fashion courses, students need to match certain images with each other, which is important. In the arts, it's very different. We're very rubric driven, so designing a rubric based assignment design so that students are very clear what are the things that they have to do. A lot of things in the arts are very pass-fail, so our system is really geared towards those things. Like in this assignment, these are the 20 things that they expect you to do, but they're literally a pass-fail type of experience. Forum participation is also very important, like we're seeing on other platforms. Of course, we need to have students engage often with media files and things like that. So coming up with designs and on our music courses, even just having the ability to upload music and make that easy. Actually similar to what they were showing with NovoEd, which is exciting. We find this to be very important, where the student's work becomes part of the process of learning. So we have a gallery by assignment. So this is all students' work that you're seeing, and you're able to then go and comment on them, learn about what other students are doing. So this is a piece of work once you click into it and see whole discussions happening about that piece of work. Similar can happen for film and music as well. So in our music classes, one of the key things we want to be able to do is for students to be able to make playlists. So they can make playlists of different students' work and then go in and comment on them. And then this is something that's really important, because we're finding students taking multiple courses from multiple different schools. We've started to build them a portfolio space. So this is a space outside of the classroom where you can go and grab your favorite work, different creative things that you've done in these classes, and showcase them, as well as showcase the different type of certificates that you have won throughout. So essentially becoming, a creative space for you to have, your digital portfolio from all of these things, showing your training and advancement in this area. The arts is really hard, because we've seen some talks about how, okay, when you do code, great, we'll go to GitHub and we'll put our code up there, and that's like an amazing space for engineers to kind of show their world. Like the arts, we don't really have something like that. So trying to find the different pieces of areas like SoundCloud and Vimeo and different things for these places, and try and bring them in together to show these trainings has been really important part of what we've been trying to do. And these are just a couple case studies that people are using, showing different people in the classroom. We find that the very big thing is like getting people, we do very little multiple choice. We use them some places, but we find it very key that you've got to get students to create. These are art schools. So in the first in the first assignment, you got to just share something and get people to engage. So in the design course, you're seeing students create these type of things, and then in the gallery actually talk with each other. This is a comics class where students are actually drawing out stories, which are incredible, and taking these pictures with their phones and uploading them, which are pretty cool. We're very into creative coding. So artists, there's like 5 or 6 languages that are used in creative coding quite heavily. One is like processing, Max MSP, Chuck, like these different things. We actually got the inventors of all those languages to teach the courses on Cadenza. So this is an area we really went crazy with. So the ability to write code in browser and actually see those things playing, and for students to go and into the gallery and actually interact with these creative inventions that different students have created. In the art history, this is the UCLA class. Again, this is like a moving eyes, and the student is going and watching this, and as they're moving their mouse, the eyes is following them. This is something that other students created, and now their peers can actually go and interact with. And what's cool is in our music classes, we've come up with cool ways of submitting music files and actually giving virtual scores and things like that to be able to, give a different type of feedback to students. So the other main thing here from Art Institute Chicago is just, again, activating, similar to what others are doing, like how do you activate the forum space to talk about history, get people to go and find things and become part of the discussion and part of the content for others.
Hi, I'm Owen Ballas. I'm faculty at CalArts, and I wanted to share today with you a little bit my experience making a course for the Cadenza platform, how that's sort of had an impact on our program, and how it's had an impact on the course that I teach at the actual school. So we have a number of courses that we've put up on Cadenza for the program. I teach in music technology there, so this is our intro first year course for music production. How do you produce music, use software like Ableton and things like that. We also have an intro to web development. This is an important part of our curriculum now, where students have to understand how to put their work online. So they use WordPress for that. This is Chuck. This is our way of getting musicians into programming. We tell them they're going to make music, and at the end of it, they're writing code that generates compositions. It's a really great entry point into the whole coding world. And then this is my course here, which is synthesis using Reactor. And we basically learn a little bit about the history of synthesizers. Then we build them from scratch using a node-based kind of programming language, and learn how to make different sounds through that process. So I've taught this course now for about, I want to say 5 or 6 years. And the curriculum was pretty solid for the on-campus approach. And when we made this course, we had to go through many of the challenges that people were talking about, trying to think about how this would work if I'm not there in person. And one of the additional challenges is CalArts are very small classrooms. So, typically I teach to 10 students in a classroom. And so there was a really strong workshop component, and we had to figure out how to transfer those sorts of ideas onto the platform. And in doing that process, I found that the course became much stronger, and it has a much more formal structure to it, and I was able to add a lot more content than I was previously doing before. But then I took a look at that and wanted to use it on campus, and so that's what I kind of want to share with you next, is how that sort of works. So this is the trailer, I guess, for the course.
I'm Owen Vallis, Professor of Music Technology at California Institute of the Arts Music Technology, Interaction, Intelligence, and Design program. Synthesizers are tools we use as musicians to create, shape, and sculpt sound. Historically, these synthesizers were very large, very expensive, and only available to a small number of musicians. However,
The course, like I said, was an intro course that its whole goal is to bring people who maybe have never done synthesis before but are very interested in it. But with CalArts, it also, and we were expecting this in the MOOC space as well, that there's students who are very familiar with this material, so we wanted to make sure we put things in there for them as well. And in thinking about this process, one of the things we wanted to do was find a way to give them actual feedback. So in the workshop thing, I'll listen to their work and talk them through ways to make it better. But how do we do that in the MOOC space? So part of the media-rich platform is, with all that content in there, we began to look at ways of analyzing it and coming up with custom visual feedback for the students. And we built a whole suite of tools that basically do audio analysis and tell the student exactly their frequency spectrum. So this student was quite different from the example they were supposed to match, how their sound changes over time, and then finally what it should have been with the settings. And what's interesting is, out of this attempt to try and give them something tangible to then build their skills off of, a whole host of interesting things happened. One was we were able to discover students, when we began to use this on campus, that submitted things that were a little too similar to each other. So listening to these things, as you can imagine, if you listen to 30 sounds, I have an example here of what they sound like. So yeah, you can imagine listening to like 20 of those. After a while, it's difficult to tell if the first one was super close to the last one. But with the system, we were able to tell that some of these were unusually close. And so we went and spoke with some of those students, and they actually told us that, they had worked during TA sessions as a group and had done it all together, and so that's why they kind of submitted the same one. And it was fine. I mean, once we found out the situation, we spoke with them and we kind of worked through it, but it was a chance or an opportunity for us to better understand the work that our students were doing that we wouldn't have had before. And similarly, we've had students come and talk to me about those visual aids and have questions about it, and how do I fix this part or this particular component. So anyways, all of that happens here in this room, which is our machine lab that we essentially teach all of our music technology courses in. And having these tools now allow us to do things on campus where we can take this gallery space that we initially built as a way for people to explore stuff in the MOOC space. And now when I go into class, I have a project where they all just make something that doesn't have anything to do with the requirements. I'm like, just make a synth that you're inspired by. And then through the upvoting and commenting, we can pick some of them and discuss them in class. And students are interested and have questions because they've already gone and looked at the material. And there's this whole sort of community aspect that makes good sense in the MOOC space, but suddenly is sort of adding a lot of energy to my in-class experience as well. So that's been very exciting. So yeah, that's pretty much how we're using it. And the same thing goes for all 4 of those courses. The music production course has similar visual feedback components. The gallery space for the web development is really interesting as students see code, talk about different things. So for me, that's one of the most exciting things, is having access to all of this media and these tools and all of these ideas that work so well in this new, larger space has also totally changed the way that we do things in these much smaller classrooms on campus. Thank you.
Let's do 1 or 2 questions for these folks, and then we'll do a general Q&A session for everyone.
Regarding the portfolio that you put together in Cadence, what are the best experiences and the challenges that you have faced so far? Any comments on that regard?
It's really hard because I think similar, I'm sure others will say something similar, where your partners are driving you to make all these improvements to the learning management system for the class, and then these things that live outside of the class are like projects that the company wants to do, and those always get the last priority, because obviously the partners' requests come first. So we have like a big vision of where we want to go with that, but it's been really amazing to see students use it, they're asking us for that. They're like, what do I do? How can I show everything I made in this class? So we're keeping on doing that.
Great.
You mentioned that a lot of the peer or feedback is rubric-based. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, I can imagine that being a pretty big challenge when the content is so varied and, you know, it's such a creative
Totally.
space.
Like, I would say, like, as opposed to, like, STEM education and computer science, it's like, there's so many things that can be done and have been done that are amazing. Like, the art space is so impossible because so much of what we do on campus as art teachers can't really be, you know, converted. So it's really hard. So it's finding those type of courses that have historical aspects, technical aspects, and you know, those things that you do in the first year, those things you do in the first semester of either undergrad or grad, like this basic knowledge so that when students come in, they already know that stuff. And also for people who are just interested in these things, you know, they already know it. So it's like picking very specific aspects that, okay, if you're doing a music class, I want it to be in this key and I want it to be in this tempo, and like, so you have to actually constrain it. So that's what we work with the teachers to, what are those things? And it's usually just like a yes or a no that you're able to do that.
But there is also opportunities, I think. A key part of arts education is certainly like this opportunity for students to reflect on their work, see it. I think that's one of the strengths that the faculty bring to it, is the ability to discuss and reflect on the work. And I think there's opportunities to build tools where students can either see their work in a new way, have it represented as some new form of media that's based off the original, or also have ways of sharing or finding other information, you know, like seeing examples of students that are similar or different.
Great, so can I ask all the presenters to gather up front? I don't think there's quite enough chairs, but maybe we can use like these ones on the side as well.
Thank you over here.
Right, and then does anyone want to ask a more general question, or even if it's just a question that you didn't get a chance to ask in a previous session? I know there's seeing some people raise their hands. Yeah?
So there seems to be a theme, particularly from the first two presentations, about the tension between design and emergence. And I'm not sure that it needs to be a tension, because you can design for emergence. You can design courses on the assumption that the learners on those courses are going to create their own environments, they're going to create their own communities, sometimes on the platform, sometimes off, and do two things. One is to try and identify where they do that and support them, and second, provide spaces that are open for those sorts of emergent communities. So one thing that happened on some of our courses was that learners started kind of squatting on discussion areas to continue the course after it had finished. And rather than seeing that as a threat or a problem, seeing it as something to be supported. And as well as that, using techniques such as reputation management to be able to then promote those people who have been most active or most supported in the community and give them additional roles. So I think there's a real opportunity to bring together design and emergence rather than seeing them as in tension.
I think I definitely agree with that. I think the way we see it as a tension is also in the fact that like the answer isn't to do one or the other, but like to find some happy balance between the two. And I would say designing for certain amounts of emergence is around reconciling certain needs for some amounts of design, particularly to allow emergence, but also for some things to emerge. And I think one thing that we noticed when we interviewed participants as well, and I think you mentioned this as well, is just like in the online space, it can be very hard, especially for people who aren't used to taking online courses, to kind of navigate, to feel okay, especially if it's anonymous in certain ways. So sometimes that emergence can come at the expense of people feeling part of a community or feeling like they can understand where this course is going. And sometimes people appreciate certain amounts of structures and designs to help them feel okay about like and kind of understand the process. But I see your point that there's certainly a affordance to kind of the online medium at being able to kind of highlight the best of both worlds in certain ways.
And I think, Susanna, you had mentioned in your presentation sort of scaffolding and planning for agency and self-direction. And sort of, I think that's similarly a way in which that scaffolding then enables what comes after.
Precisely. Yeah, we expected it. We did it, especially because the first time we did a creative writing MOOC, it was more like camp. You know, it didn't have, basically because it didn't have a certificate. We found that once we introduced a certificate that produced anxiety about doing it right. And that's, I think, a little bit where tension came up for us. Like, there's the issue of wanting to scaffold emergence, you know, excitement, creativity, take this in a whole new direction. That's what, you know, becoming an artist and refining artistic practice is. But at the same time, there are learners who aren't comfortable, as you said, with doing whatever, with watching all kinds of things pop up, or they're excited by it, but they're afraid they're going to lose their way. You know, there are learners who want to make sure that they can still do the path to the credential that's important to them. You know, and so exactly sort of capitalizing on the emergence and steering it, using it to support the original course structures as well, I think is what we go for.
I have a question about Cadenza. So for the learners, their portfolio, everything on that portfolio, is it owned by the learner or owned by you guys, or?
No, it's all the learner. And they have privacy settings, whether they want to share it with the world or not. Or just have it as a collection tool for themselves.
So listening to all of you was like getting a huge permission to be creative. You know, getting out of my own box, perhaps there are places. So here's the question I'm asking myself. If there is such a beautiful way to design and experience it online, what's the difference between what a faculty might be doing in the classroom where there's face-to-face versus when it's online? What's the difference? I mean, it sounds better that way.
I think a lot of the courses that we, or the online courses of designers we spoke to, often had face-to-face versions of their course, and I think in talking to them and hearing from a range of people, it seemed like there certainly are many affordances of the kind of online medium. I think like the ability to rely on a huge number of other people who are really enthusiastic and self-select in to kind of support one another is great. Certain aspects of the like design emergence tension can be negotiated in a nice way. But I think there are also challenges, and I think I think we don't want to underestimate what some of those challenges can be. A lot of it comes with like kind of having to build a sense of community and how hard that can be without the ability to look in the eye of someone, you know, 5 feet away and kind of hear them speak. And I'm sure there are many others, but I think you're totally right that there are definitely some affordances that it's really exciting to think about how we might capitalize on those in the future. But I think it's also important to think about what are the kind of challenges we need to overcome to kind of get there.
Well, I think.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to actually say something going that you noted about sort of the potential for new media to make the artifacts of learning very visible, that enables sharing and discussion, and that's something that doesn't have to only happen in sort of a massive online space, but you talked about bringing that into the classroom, so it's sort of like the value and aspiration for learning that's there in both, but some things we learned that we could do, we can then also do.
For sure, and it's interesting that you bring up the challenges. I think the biggest one, especially in the classes that we teach in the music tech program, is the moment, like I said, in those small 10-person classrooms, to have one-on-one relationships develop between the instructor and the students. And while I'm active on the forums, and it definitely seems that that leads to like more engagement, and I love seeing what the students do, there's definitely a distance that I can't close. And I think that was part of the motivation for coming up with these other artifacts, is to provide new opportunities for them to have that reflection moment and to open up doors. And the things I'm most excited about is that when you have large numbers, you know, thousands of students, I think the opportunity for reflection and exploration suddenly becomes larger than what I could do in that 10-person class. So yeah, it's a balance, there's trade-offs.
Thank you.
Maybe one more question?
So related to this, you've identified several elements I think are indeed more central to the creative art, such as the idea that what students create is of essence and importance and value that should be shared back with the class. the idea that it's much more, much deeper feedback, and the feedback is conversation. It's not in a relationship. It's not just one time. And we see it a lot in design studios, where indeed like the group of people really share deep feedback on what students create. So how do you design for this? Not when you implement it in your class, but with 1,000 or even 500 students. So let's go, I don't know how we define 500 today, but if we're around this scale, how do we design for this intimate relationship around feedback of student-created content?
One of the things that we do is we coach the students through our teaching moderators and every way we can, basically through every messaging system we can use, the teachers, the class pages, the class announcements.